Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on lean warehousing and distribution. So to start off with, I'm going to ask a very simple question, and I will also respond to the question, which is, why do companies need warehouses or other facilities? And so, we hear about this very often. Companies, especially that have factories, end up having warehouses as well. And the question is why? Um, and if we sort of think about it, generally speaking, companies choose to have a warehouse because the amount of supply they have of goods may not exactly match the demand in the market at any specific point in time. And so what they try to do is that they try to keep some extra stock. And this is sometimes, called safety stock as well. And the whole idea is to keep some stock just in case there's a sudden increase in demand. There are a lot of studies that say that, look, if there's a customer that comes into a store looking for something and they can't find it, they may never come back looking for your product again. They may try your competitor's product, and you may lose a customer permanently. So companies definitely want to avoid that situation, and that's why they choose to keep a safety stock. But the question is, where do you keep this inventory or extra stock? And so for that purpose, for storage purpose, companies many times actually decide to have a separate warehouse. So storage is definitely one reason for having a warehouse, but there's another reason as well, and that is that many times, especially for example, if you decide to get a shipment from China, it's usually a very large shipment that China will send you. And the reason is, economies of scale. If you place a very big order, the per unit cost goes down. And so many times companies try to avail, there are various reasons. There may be a minimum order quantity for, something that you want to order from a supplier. And so in order to avail those, good prices, many times people choose to actually buy a larger quantity than they need. And so for that reason, they many times end up having to use a warehouse. So bulk buying, definitely many times leads to discounts, and so that's that. So these are the reasons that companies generally have warehouses. Um, and another thing is that, if you look at these diagrams at the bottom, having a central warehouse many times just makes distribution of goods a lot easier. There's less movement. So on the left-hand side, you see a situation where there are various stores being supplied, and there's no central warehouse. So things are being manufactured in, let's say, 3 factories, but the amount of distributions, each factory is then distributing to the various stores. In the other situation, there are 3 factories, which are the red dots, and everything is centralized at one warehouse location and then sent to the final destination, and it's just a lot cleaner. And so the number of transactions happening on the left is actually you multiply that, the 3 red dots into 4, and so there are 12 various transactions happening, whereas in the other case there's the 3 red dots plus the 4 blue squares, and so there's 7. So there's a you have 12 versus 7. There's less movement, which is good. And so if you recall, in Lean Six Sigma, one of the 7 ways is reducing movement and transportation. And so you can see that happening when companies choose to add a warehouse in their facilities. Okay, so now if we start digging in a little deeper and trying to understand, is there always one type of a warehouse? Are there different types of warehouses? To answer that question, there are several different kinds of warehouses that companies may choose to have. um, you know, One of the warehouse facilities that they can choose to have is a raw material storage. And these warehouse facilities are usually placed or situated close to the manufacturing point. So, the raw material, it makes sense. You want to have all your raw material close to your manufacturing concern so that there's not much of a distance and things can be sent easily to the manufacturing concern. Another kind of warehouse is a work in process warehouse. And work in process, as you know, are half finished goods. So they're not exactly raw materials, they're not finished goods, they're somewhere in the middle. And so some companies choose to have a separate warehouse just to store all of these work in process goods. Another kind of warehouse is a finished goods warehouse. And again, this is usually kept, because companies want to keep the extra stock that I mentioned a little earlier in case of a sudden increase in demand. Again, these are usually located close to the factory where things are manufactured, so that to reduce the transportation costs. And now there are some other kinds of warehouses, such as, one of them is called a local warehouse. And these are basically, warehouses that are very close to the stores that goods are being provided to. And so this is, the benefit of having these warehouses is that, if there's a change in demand of customers, they want more of a certain product, it's very easy to very quickly send those products to the stores from the local warehouse. So those local warehouses are just very close to the actual stores. Okay, now the next one is a little different, and this is called a fulfillment center. And so these are warehouses that are specifically kept for e-commerce goods. So generally speaking, if there's a company, they like to keep a separate warehouse for their e-commerce, separate warehouse for the goods that are going to the stores, because the e-commerce is managed completely separately. The supply chain has different nuances that the regular supply chains don't have. Another kind of a warehouse is called a distribution center. Towards the end of this lecture, I'll be talking a little bit more about the difference between warehouses and distribution centers. But for now, a distribution center is basically a kind of a warehouse that accumulates and consolidates products from multiple sources for common shipment to a common destination. So the distribution center is, going to collect goods from various different sources, keep them in one place, and then, a shipment will be made to the customer. So it's sort of a place of consolidation. And then another kind of a warehouse is a mixing center. And this basically receives materials from multiple sources for cross-docking and shipment of mixed material pallet to pallet. So basically, mixing centers are, you have a cross-dock, basically things are coming in and going out. So they're kind of kept for a very short period of time in a mixing center, in and out kind of a situation. And materials are coming in from various different sources and being shipped out. And sometimes the materials that are being shipped out are not exactly in the same form that they were when they came in. So you may have to mix up the products. So there may be, the final box of shipment that's going out may have various goods, not all the same kinds of goods. And that's why this is called a mixing center, because it mixes the products and ships it out. So it receives goods from many sources, mixes them up according to the customer's requirement, packages it, and ships it out. So that's what happens in a mixing center. Okay, so there are, two competing objectives in any warehouse. One is that, you in a warehouse, if you have a warehouse, you want to maximize the space. And so you want to make sure that you fit in as many things as you possibly can in a warehouse because you're paying for the space and you want to maximize the space. But the problem is, if you really just keep putting in everything and just overflowing the warehouse, it's very difficult to find things and organize things. And so it really reduces the flow or the speed of the flow of goods. And so these are two separate, competing objectives in a warehouse. The storing, how much you kind of push in and maximize the utilization versus optimizing the throughput, which means the ease of placing things in a warehouse and picking them and shipping them out. So you don't want a warehouse that's too packed. Obviously, on the other hand, you don't want a warehouse that is kind of empty because you're wasting money in that case. So this is a very fundamental warehouse trade-off, which basically means that it's space versus time. So again, if you're either you're you may want to be maximizing the space utilization, but then it's going to take so much longer to find things. So this is a trade-off, right? Um, how much you're utilizing the space versus how much time it takes to sort of put things away and pick things out of the warehouse. So that's a fundamental warehouse trade-off. This is basically a diagram sort of showing you everything that I discussed in the previous slide. And so just a couple things I want to point out on this slide. The distribution center over here, collecting various things from different warehouses and then shipping it out. So that's what's going on over here. Over here on the top left, you see that raw material warehouses, work in process warehouses, very close to the facility. Same with the finished goods warehouses, close to the facility, and so that's something. And then from the distribution center, there is a distinction. So things are being sent to a fulfillment center, which is then going to be doing e-commerce and shipping things to the final destination, the customers. And then there's also regional, and there are also regional and local DCs. And so this is a sort of a distribution center, a regional distribution center that's situated close to the stores. And so this is going to be sending inventory straight to the stores. Okay, moving right along, there are a couple of general rules regarding warehouses. So one of the big rules is that the smaller the unit that you're handling in a warehouse, the greater the handling cost. So if you're handling huge boxes, pallets, really big units, you're generally it's going to be easier to handle those. So the cost of managing big boxes is going to be less than the cost of managing small boxes. And so on the left, if you look in the world of supply chain management, there are goods, there are boxes that are, you see there's a pallet over here at the bottom. And so usually in warehouses and in shipping, there are pallets, and on these pallets, goods are, piled on, right? And so this entire thing, it's usually pallets are of standard size, and they are made according to what's easy to put on a ship. So what's easy to put in a container so that the container is completely full, and then the shipping container is then put on a ship. And so these pallets are standard in size. Usually there's an international standard for the pallet size, and so that's how they work. And on this pallet, you'll see that there are various layers of boxes. And so each layer is called a layer or a tier. And this layer is made of various cartons or cases that are put together. And inside of these cases or cartons are smaller pieces, right? The inner pack. And each one of these pieces is called an each in the world of supply chain. So there are many eaches in a packet, in a case or a carton. So, this general handling rule is one that is very important to remember. The smaller the handling unit, the greater the handling cost. So the cost of handling eaches will be a lot more than the cost of handling a pallet. So size, as I just mentioned, does impact the design and operations of supply chains. Okay, now I'm going to be talking a little bit about core operational functions in a warehouse. There are several important things that happen in a warehouse on a daily basis. To start off with, goods are received in a warehouse. Goods are then put away in a warehouse, and then they are stored for a certain period of time. Once there is some sort of a request from a customer or something needs to be shipped out, then things need to be picked from the place where they were put away, and then they need to be checked, packed, and shipped out. So that's a lot of work happening in warehouses. Something for you to really notice in this particular slide is that the percent of labor cost is the highest for picking things. So it's, it doesn't take that long to receive something and put it away. Storage doesn't require any labor, but finding the good when you need it requires 55% of labor cost comes from picking goods. And shipping out again isn't as labor intensive, but finding goods in the warehouse actually is. I will be going through each one of these in a little bit of detail, but a couple other things I do want to point out over here is there are certain value added services that do happen in warehouses and distribution centers. And right over here at the bottom, you can see them. These include customizing products. So products, a lot of the work, their companies may be following a postponement strategy. And so the goods are almost, 3/4 made, but there may be certain things the customer requires at the end, having their name customized on something, or tagging, labeling, special packaging, minor assembling, putting things in a kit. All of those things are included in customization of products that does happen in warehousing. And as I mentioned, this whole idea of postponement. So many times things are kept, halfway ready, 3/4 way ready, and once an actual order comes through, the warehouse is informed, and the final steps are actually done in the warehouse or distribution center. Another thing to also mention over here is that in warehousing, there are also goods are also returned, right? So it's not only, there is something called reverse logistics, and this basically means you send things out to the customer, you ship them, but for some reason, if the customer things are not according to the customer's expectations, they may be shipped back. And when they are shipped back, they're not going to be shipped back to any factory. They're going to be coming in to a warehouse. And so the reverse logistics in warehousing also has to be managed. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the core warehouse functions one by one. And the first one I'm going to be talking to you about is receiving goods. And this is, something that, is the first step in the entire warehouse process. And so it's how you manage this actually sets up the entire interaction at the warehouse. Generally speaking, goods have an advanced shipping notice that is attached to them, so you have some knowledge in advance about, okay, certain goods are going to be coming in to the warehouse. And this actually helps organizing, because you'll know whether in advance, okay, certain things are going to be coming in, and you can organize accordingly. There are once you when you receive goods, when you receive goods, you do want to make sure that there's not just mayhem and chaos at the docking site. So you want to make sure that there's a schedule, and you inform people that are going to be dropping things off, and that there's a schedule, and that they should be coming in at certain times. And this will help avoid long lines and a lot of problem at the docking site and the yard site. So this also helps reduce a lot of pollution, because you really don't want 50 trucks standing outside of the docking, um, outside of the dock. Okay. Some other things, once goods come in, usually as soon as they're received, there are certain labels or tags that are attached to them, and generally those labels and tags have some key information about the weight, what's inside these boxes, and so as soon as they come in, that whole process starts. It's best to try to minimize this activity as much as possible. Whenever it is possible, companies like to use the drop shipping option, which basically means that the goods are shipped directly from the factory to the final consumer from the factory. So ideally, companies don't want to necessarily send things to the warehouse and then from the warehouse have them shipped out to the customer. It just doesn't make sense because it's additional cost. So companies really try to do that as much as possible. Sometimes it's not possible, and so then they do use the warehouse. But drop shipping is something that that companies really try to use as a strategy as much as possible. Also, wherever possible, companies try to reduce their costs by you having multiple compartments, or just fitting things together, minimizing the transportation cost. And so they're always looking for ways to reduce costs. But again, drop shipping, great strategy for companies. If for some reason drop shipping doesn't work, the second best option that companies like to do is something called cross docking, where goods are sent in to a warehouse, and they are very quickly sorted and they're sent out. So it's an in and out kind of an operation in cross docking. There's no inspection or labeling and or none of that. It's just very quick. So goods will come in inbound right over here, and the cross dock will just quickly send it right over to the outbound section, and they're going to go shipped out, and that's cross docking. So ideally companies like to use this. They don't really want the whole goods to be first of all, they want to avoid sending goods to warehouses because it's additional cost, and if they are being sent to the warehouse, they would best like it to be a cross docking situation, so that things don't have to be stored away and then picked and then shipped out, because again, companies want to save costs wherever they possibly can. Okay, the next core warehousing function is put away, or putting things away in a warehouse. And so what happens over here is that generally companies don't just randomly put things away in a warehouse. Warehouses are usually very large facilities, especially if you're talking about a fulfillment center, they are huge. So and by huge, I mean it could be the size of a football field. I mean really, really big. So For putting things away, generally companies like to use some sort of warehouse management system. This is, part of ERP, and generally speaking, they like to use some sort of an automated system so that as soon as good comes in, they can go to the system, identify what slots in the warehousing facility are empty, and then they can tell their staff to go and place the goods in the specific area where there are empty slots. And in order to identify which slots there are, it's not just so easy as to just sort of be like, oh, okay, there's an empty slot. No, you need to understand the size, the weight of the goods that have come in, and whether or not they would fit into that particular slot in the warehouse. And so, generally speaking, there's quite a bit of work involved, and that's why companies choose to use automated systems. Now, there are certain approaches that companies have. Some companies like to identify exactly before the goods come in, exactly where they're going to be placed, and have the goods placed according to this preconceived plan of theirs. Other companies like to batch and sequence. So they basically want to bring in similar goods and place them at a certain location. And another approach is to just kind of chaotically just place things and find things later on. So there are various strategies that companies use, and it's really up to them. But for sure, a warehouse management system, regardless of what strategy you're using, is very helpful. So if you look at a warehouse management system, you'll see something like this. And here you can see, this is sort of showing a warehouse with all sort of empty slots, sorry, for storage. And the blue squares are indicating empty slots, empty location slots to where pallets can be stored. And the red squares are showing pallets that need to be picked up. And so if you look at a warehouse manufacturing system, this is kind of what you'll see. And then you can, let your employees know where they need to go and what they need to pick up, and so on and so forth. But you can see, if this is a map, that the distances are quite a lot, right? It seems like people are going to have to really, it's not going to be easy for them to quickly go and pick things up. Generally speaking, many times they have indoor vehicles to help them go and pick things up. Something else that a lot of companies do is there is this thing called dual cycle operations, also called interleaving putaways and retrievals. And this basically means that if there's a whole map sort of made out for the employee to go and they're asked to drop certain things and pick up certain things on the same once they on their route. So they'll have a route, and on that route they'll be told, okay, you know what, drop off this X box at one location, pick up box A at the other location. And so on the same journey they'll be dropping off some boxes, picking up some boxes. Again, this whole process is called dual cycle operations, or also known as interleaving of putaways and retrievals. And this saves time, this saves cost, and it just makes a lot of sense. And so again, with a good warehouse management system, you can organize, you can inform your employees exactly how they should retrieve things and how they should put things away. All right, now I'm going to be going into a little bit more detail about order picking. And as you recall, this is something that actually is the most labor intensive task out of all the different tasks. If you really think about, and if you look at the breakup of why it's so labor intensive, picking up an order requires traveling, going to a specific location, searching for goods, taking those goods out, and then there's some other tasks as well. But again, if you look at it, the traveling part is what is taking the longest. So how you pick things up, really, it depends. If you're going to be picking up big pallets, that's the easiest and fastest, but usually you're going to need some big, some sort of automation, because these are pallets are generally quite heavy. Case picking, some people may be doing it by hand. Depends on how many cases there are, how heavy they are. Perhaps certain automation is also needed here, but definitely for small picking items, this can be done by hand by employees. But very important to remember over here that the smaller the good, the more expensive and time consuming it is to pick it and handle it. As far as the layout of warehouses, it differs. It's not as if it's, there's one, best way, even though generally speaking, people prefer to go with the aisle, this kind of parallel aisles flow, and that's how they prefer to do it. But, some people actually prefer a different design of setting up the warehouse. And this is an angled or fishbone aisle design, a little bit different. And so it really, again, it varies. The reason some people prefer the angled fishbone aisles is that, this can increase efficiency in certain people's opinions. So again, there's no one way, whatever people prefer, they can choose. So in this slide, and I just want to make this just a little bit bigger for you to see, but there is a certain machinery over here that helps you, pick things up. Now, let's just, if you look over here, there are also pallets. So you see that, things are laying on at the bottom. There's sort of this wooden layer right at the bottom. And that's sort of you can identify that these are pallets. And oops, it just went really small. So yeah, so you can see, in certain cases, it's not like everything has been put on a pallet. You also see some cartons here. So everything is, there's all kinds of things, different things placed at this warehouse facility. When employees are asked to pick eaches, this is the most labor intensive of all the it's the most labor intensive, right, compared to pallets, as I previously mentioned. Well, because it's so labor intensive and it takes time, companies have changed. They've tried to evolve, and there's some new technology that has come in. So, for example, there are some IT systems. You can feed it into the system exactly what the order is, and employees will be standing, and there'll be a light. So there's a technology called pick to light system. And so what happens is that, if the order says, okay, 5 items of item C, then C items will light up. And so the employee will know exactly to go to the C item and take 5 from there. And then if they have to add, 7 W items, the W will light up, and they'll go and they'll pick up 7. And so that's called a pick to light system. Again, the idea is to save time and make the employee's life a little easier, and thereby reduce costs. Something else that's started happening is that in Amazon, Amazon actually has some robots, and those robots are called Kiva robots. And so what happens is employees will be standing, and the robots will actually come to the employees, and employees can then pick up the items from the robots. This method of eaches picking is called stock to picker system. And again, this is just when the Kiva robots bring items to pick to the picking station. So that's how it's done. Otherwise, things you see in these other photos, employees just go to various boxes themselves, um, and they pick up exactly whatever is needed, and so they pick up everything that's needed, put it together in order, and ship it out. So again, there are various methods that companies use, but there is technology that's stepping into the each's picking for sure. Now, next, I'm going to be talking a little bit about order picking strategies. So we mentioned that, the WMS helps identify, where things need to be picked up and where things need to be dropped. But there are various picking strategies that can be used. And one thing is that it's almost like a grocery list. You go to a big grocery store, and you have a grocery list, and so you just go around in circles and you figure out where things are, and you just kind of try to figure out the shortest path. But you really don't have any particular plan in mind. You're just kind of going with the flow. So that's called a single picker, single order, because your grocery list is your order, and so you're going around the grocery store trying to fulfill your order and picking things up along the way. So that's one picking strategy. Another one picking strategy is called single picker, multiple orders. And this is called, you basically have one particular person, but this is a more organized approach. And it's similar to divide and conquer grocery shopping for multiple people. So let's say you're going in and you actually have to do grocery shopping for 5 people. Well, in that case, since you're going to have to be doing grocery shopping of multiple items, you're probably going to want to have a more organized approach. And so you'll look at them. Excuse me. So you're probably going to look at the way the store is laid out. You're going to have a particular plan in mind about how you're going to go and get all the things in a way that's going to reduce your travel time and the distance that you have to travel. And so, you generally speaking, in this method, pickers become experts of certain zones. So they'll just know automatically what the shortest distance is, how to pick things, and go about the different zones. So this is another method that's used. This method is definitely a lot more organized, and it's quicker, but it requires sorting and consolidation of items. It requires planning in advance. So there are some pluses and there are some minuses. Finally, the last component is check, pack, and ship. And so in this component of warehousing, the goods, before they're going to be shipped out, are checked. The labels are checked, the weight is confirmed, the volume is confirmed. And then things are, unitized. So they could be, a number of different things could be being put on a pallet, and they maybe have to, be packed on the pallet. And you see that at the bottom over here, there are a bunch of different cartons that have been put on a pallet, and they've just been, this plastic has been put around them, ready to be shipped off. So all of these various, things happen in the check, pack, ship. And you want to make sure that if you're shipping things out, you're not shipping the wrong things. You also want to make sure that goods are packaged in a way that they're not going to be damaged along, while they're traveling. And you want to just, sort of ensure that, once things are being shipped on the ship, they've been laid out very well on the pallet. And so if they're being put in a container, things aren't going to topple over or get damaged. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Now, in terms of, if you have to see how well a warehouse is being managed, there's certain areas that need to be looked into. The first one is labor, and you want to make sure that your labor costs are low, and if you do have labor, that you are utilizing it in the most efficient way possible. Similarly with space, you want to ensure that your utilization of the space is very, very good, and that there's not a lot of idle space, but yet at the same time things aren't choked up. Equipment, you want to make sure that the equipment that you're using is well maintained, and that your money has been invested well, and the equipment is being used in a good way. So there's certain metrics that are used for to measure warehouse manufacturing. One is productivity efficiency, and this is basically the ratio of output to the input. For example, in labor, you will be measuring how many units or cases or pallets are being managed in one labor hour. So that will give you a good idea. You can check this across the industry to see what's happening in other companies, and you can easily tell whether or not you're being efficiently using your resources. Utilization, an example of this is, so what utilization is the percentage of an asset being actively used. You definitely want that, you have a good utilization level. For example, your storage and how dense your storage is, how many things are being stored in a particular area. This you can measure by the storage capacity in a warehouse divided by the total area of a warehouse. The quality and effectiveness, this is the accuracy in you can measure the accuracy in things being put away in inventory, picking, shipping, all of that can give you a very good idea about how effective your warehouse is, what's the quality of your warehouse in general. The stock time, this is again, there's one metric known as the dock to stock time. This is the time from the receipt to being ready to be picked, how long that takes. The order cycle time, which is the time from when an order is dropped off to the warehouse until it's ready to be shipped. So all of these things will give you a very good idea of how your warehouse is doing. One thing I do want to, towards the end of this lecture, mention to you is that one of the key distinctions of a warehouse versus a distribution center is that there's a lot more value addition work being done in a distribution center as compared to a warehouse. So all the value added functions, any sort of work that's actually happening on the products, any value addition, there's more of that in the distribution centers. Companies in general, as I mentioned earlier in this lecture as well, aim to reduce warehousing whenever possible, and they, in many cases they are fine with the distribution aspect of it, the distribution center, because that's sort of where value addition is happening. So it's kind of part of the manufacturing process, but warehousing, they definitely try to reduce wherever possible. If you want to make sure that you have a very lean distribution center, there are certain things to keep in mind. One thing is you want to make sure that your record integrity is correct. Everything that is being reported in your warehouse or distribution center is actually there. Again, there are, the warehouse manufacturing system that I mentioned, the IT system, that helps with this in a big way. You want to make sure your demand estimation is correct. The amount of goods, of inventory that are actually coming into the warehouse or distribution center are based on demand forecasting. So you want to make sure that's correct. Perform time and form postponement, all of the value added functions such as labeling, packaging, assembly, manufacturing. You want to make sure that that's being done very efficiently. You want to make sure the delivery time, transportation and delivery time is as low as possible. Practice to make order production strategy. There should be a strategy definitely in place. You should be utilizing IT whenever possible. Strategically position cross-docking facilities. So within your distribution center, it should be laid out in a very efficient way. So your cross docking, your inbound and outbound should not be too far away from each other. Your inbound dock and your outbound dock, they should be at a reasonable distance. And you want to make sure that you're really optimizing your channel distribution. So with that, I come to an end to this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking to you in the next lecture. Thank you.